There are some things that you might expect to be able to take for granted when you're writing a computer program, such as that when you try to save or load from a file, when you specify the file name, it can refer to exactly one and only one locations on your computer. Hello all the crazy people out there, my name is Michael. I like Wizards and Dragons and making games, and let's talk about the GameMaker file system sandbox. So I spent most of last week's video basically blasting GameMaker to pieces over how it handled releasing its new and allegedly improved intelligence system. And because the pendulum must swing both ways, today I'm going to actually defend one of what most people consider to be the more bizarre aspects of the engine, which is how it handles access to external files. Anyway, GameMaker gives you a bunch of functions for accessing external files, both reading and writing. You have things like file, text, open, append, read from string. Actually, don't know what that one's about.
Hey.
Read and write. You have files for dealing with buffers, such as buffer save, buffer load, and also some specialized versions of those two functions. There are some functions for like saving images, like sprite save, sprite add, surface save, that kind of thing. And all of the functions which pertain to reading and writing files from the system, they'll all interact with the operating system's file system in pretty much the same way. So when you try to read or write files from the disk in GameMaker, there are two separate parts of your computer's file system where you might end up looking at. So firstly, there is what is known as the file bundle, or like the installation files if you prefer. This is if you were to like go to a GameMaker game on Steam and browse local files, or if you were to just download the game yourself and open it up to see what's inside. This is what you would get when you install the game. You have, of course, the main executable. You have the data wad, which on Windows is going to be data.win, on Linux is going to be data.unx. It's the same basic idea, just with a different file name, based on like what operating system you're running your game on. If you're using, for example, Steamworks, you'll have a couple of Steam-related DLLs, background music, which is streamed from the disk, and then, of course, all the other junk that you might use to make your game run. So this is the file bundle. It's pretty straightforward. You can read from this area, but you can't write to it unless you do a specific thing, which I know that several of you have already left comments about. Anyway, the second location on your computer which you can access with GameMaker is where you would go if you wanted to save player progress and then reload it at a later date. And this is a little more hidden. So on Windows, if you go to your user folder and then if you go to the Appdata folder, this is a hidden file by default. So if you don't see an Appdata folder in your user folder, you'll probably want to go and turn on the checkbox, where is it, in Windows Explorer for show hidden items. Because if you uncheck this checkbox, as you saw, the Appdata folder just disappeared. So if we enable that and go in here, we have local, low, and roaming. By default, GameMaker will go into the local folder, and then this is basically things like user preferences or game save files for all of the, or at least most of the programs on your computer. And because it lives in your user folder, this is all per user, so if you have multiple user accounts on the same computer, you won't be able to see each other's user folders or like game save data or anything like that. Anyway, in my case, if I were to scroll down to the bottom here and go to the folder with the name of, for example, Wizarducks and the Lost Hat, and click on it, this is where save files for this game would live. That's going to be in the local Appdata folder. And from here, GameMaker has the ability to both read and write files. So we're going to play around with this a little bit today. Jumping back to my sample project. So this is the same old sample project as usual. All right. It's not that exciting. We have a duck and we have NPCs, and this is I've been using the sample project for like 4 years. Maybe I should mix it up one of these days. So let's start poking the GameMaker file system to see what kind of noises it makes. So I'm going to go and start by opening up the included files folder. And we'll just insert something into here, and we'll see what we can do with it. So, included files in GameMaker, by the way, for those who don't know, these are the files that will just get copied to your GameMaker, like installation, or your game's installation rather, the file bundle when you build your game. So anything that goes in the data files folder in your GameMaker project will just end up, like, installed next to your game. So let's just create myself a text file. What should I call this? How about super secret message.txt. And then we can open this up in Notepad. What should our super secret message be? How about something like Let's just go with the classic. And then, let's get out of there. I'm gonna close that included files window. And then, for example, when the game starts, let's imagine that that's like a file that contains something that your game needs to run. We can say, let's say, what did I call it? Super secret message.txt. We can load that file. We can say show message file text read string, and then file text close when we're done with it. And then when we run our game, we'll be able to open up that file. We'll be able to read the super secret message from the super secret message text file, and we'll just show it in a message box. All right. Excellent. We can access files in the file bundle. So that's reading a file. So let's say you wanted to do the reverse, and you wanted to write to a file instead. And again, I'm just going to use a rather silly contrived example here. But let's say var f equals file text open write. Again, you can use a whole host of other file or buffer or Spart or whatever writing functions for this, but I'm just gonna do something a little silly. Let's just say file text open write, and I'm gonna call it like save.txt or something like that. And we can file text write string. Let's just put a little message in here. We can say you saved the game. Let's add a few more exclamation marks so that everyone knows we're serious. And then when we're done with that, of course, file text close. I'm going to comment this out so that I don't have that message box popping up again later on. Now when I run the game, we can go and wait for it to start. The save happened in the create event, so now that it's running, it should have saved that file to local storage. And to find that file, I'm going to want to go to local storage, and since the name of this project is like base project or base tutorial or whatever, we can open up that file in the local Appdata folder, and then we can see that there is a save.txt, and that when we open that up, it says you saved the game. And I think it actually even has the same number of exclamation marks, which is pretty cool. Glad to know that the game is taking us seriously. Now, of course, if you want to read this, you can let's say instead of saying file text open read super secret message.txt, we can say file text open read save.txt. And there is not a file named save.txt in the included files bundle, in the data files bundle. But that file does exist in our save area in local storage. And now when I run the game and wait for the message box to pop up, it will open up save.txt in the save area. And it will show us the message that we wrote out the first time, and it'll say, you saved the game, with 5 exclamation marks. All right? So I'm sure the question that at least some of you have on your mind right now is, what happens if you have a file in, for example, the save area, which happens to have the same name as a file in your file bundle, in your included files. And if you were to change the name of this file in our save area to, for example, super secret message.txt, and if we were to load that one in instead. So we now have a file of the same name in both the included files and in the save area. So you might wonder, under this condition, which one will win? And if you have 2 files of the same name, the save area will win. And I suppose that that does make sense, because if you save a file to the save area and it has the same name as something in your included files, and if the opposite of this were to happen and the file in included files were to win, then basically the file that you wrote to the save area would be lost to the void. And you'd never be able to get the information in it back unless the user actually goes in this folder themselves and messes around with it. And that's probably not what most people want to happen. The opposite is also true, by the way, and I can't really show this in the GameMaker IDE, because when you run your game through the IDE with the play button or with F5, it will actually run your game from a temporary directory, which will be like recreated every time you run your game. So if I were to go and let's say read our super secret message, and then if we were to save this message to a file of the same name, and if I were to go and then build my game, let me just stick this in like, I have way too many folders in this projects folder. I'm just gonna save it here as a like a temporary build, and that's going to put the you know, build this project to a version that you can share on the internet or whatever. And if I were to extract this from the zip that it gave us and then run it, let's see, let's go in here, and we can see that we've got our executable, we've got the music which is being streamed from the disk, we've got data.win, and we've got the an options file, which isn't really important for most things, but that comes with basically every GameMaker game. And we've also got super secret message.txt. By the way, before I run it, I'm also going to go into the local storage and delete this so that we can like start over from scratch. So if I were to double click on the executable and run it for the first time, it's going to pop up a message box that says, "Can someone explain Sarah's collision code?" All right. If I were to drag over the Windows Explorer file and then hit OK, we would see that after the message box pops up, it's going to create a folder that says super secret message.txt, and then it's gonna, you know, contain our super secret message, or other super secret message. And then if I were to, well, a couple of things. If I were to go back to the original file has not been modified, so this one still says, "Can someone explain Sarah's collision code?" And if I were to run the game again, for example, the second time, the message box now says you saved the game. Because the first time the game is going to run, this over here will not exist, so GameMaker will look in the GameMaker install directory, and it'll load the file in the install directory in the included files. It will then create the file in local storage, and the second time that you run the game, it'll look for the file. First, it'll look in local storage. It will open that file because it exists here. It'll show us that message, and then we'll be on our way. Now, all this sounds complicated, and admittedly, it kind of is. I just spent how many minutes explaining that? But it bears mentioning that you really probably shouldn't actually do this. Like, for the sake of not being completely confusing, it's really not a great idea in general to save files with the same name as a file that exists in the file bundle over here. The only real reason that I can think of for doing that, like, that you'd want to do this on purpose, is that if you have some kind of, like, settings file and you ship the default settings in the included files in the file bundle, so like you'll get your default settings when you install your game through Steam or whatever, and then if the player wants to overwrite any of those settings, they can like the game can save a modified version of the same file name to local storage over here, and then when, like, from then on, when the game runs, it'll use the modified version of the file instead of the original. And then if you want to revert to the default settings, then you can just have the game like delete the modified file, and then when the file is deleted, it'll go back to using the one in the file bundle. That's the only real reason that I can think of for leaning on this behavior. Let's get out of there. So what do I want to do next? So what happens if you try to access something that's not in either the in the file bundle or in the save area? So if you wanted to, for whatever reason, you could hard code the name of a file, or you could look at the name of a file somewhere else on your computer. For example, C. You know, I'm going to use forward slashes because I think backslashes are dumb. C:// user/drago/super secret message.txt. So if we were to try to write a file to like my regular user folder, this is a mess. I should probably clean this folder out one of these days. But anyway, this location is not somewhere which GameMaker will be able to read or write from, like, by default. So if I try to run this, this just straight up won't work, and I believe it'll error when I run the game. So, oh, it actually didn't error. It just didn't do anything. You know, I kind of wish it did error so that you could like actually know if it didn't work or something. But anyway, if I go back to my user folder over here, The file which I attempted to write does not exist, so there is no text file that says like super secret message or anything like that. It just like silently failed, which I'm not thrilled about, but it does illustrate the point that if you try to write to a file from outside your from outside either the file bundle or the save area, that you won't be allowed to. If we try to do the same thing in reverse, so let me go and create a folder, I mean a file that's, let's just say like here be dragons.txt. And I'm starting to get lazy with the super secret messages, so let's just make that like or something. Let's do the opposite. So let's try and read from a file that we don't have permission to access. So file text open read c:/ users / drago / here be dragons. If I run this, nothing of use is going to happen. And I see this one actually did error with the message that file is not open for reading. So at least we got that one correct. By the way, file like directory conventions on Windows, usually you will see backslashes used for like folders in a file system hierarchy. I am not really a fan of backslashes for this reason, because I think when you have to use two to escape them, it just looks dumb. So I will prefer to use a / just in general. On Linux, the convention is to use // for directories. In GameMaker, it actually doesn't matter, because GameMaker's file system abstraction will just use whatever is correct for the current operating system that you're running on. And you don't really have to worry which direction the slashes are facing. But just in case anyone was wondering if this is causing the error and causing me to not be able to do my file operations, that's not the reason. The reason is that we basically don't have permission to access these files. So there's a couple of ways around this. One is that GameMaker gives you a couple of functions which relate to like opening a file finder dialog. We can say get open file name, get open file name. This is a function which will take two arguments. There's a filter, which is basically like a little bit of code for like the type of file you want to open. Like if you want to only be able to open text files or something, you can write a filter that's like text files, vertical pipe, and then wildcard.txt. And the file name, which is just like the default file name that you want to open. And I'm just going to leave that blank. You can leave both of these blank if you don't care. This is going to return a file name, which you can then use and say var f equals file text open read from that file name. And this is when you use get open file name, or its counterpart get save file name, which I'll get to in a minute. These functions basically give GameMaker special permission to access the file anywhere on your computer, assuming that you as the user have access to that file. If you try to like read a system file from a non-admin account, you might run into problems. But if I were to run this, and if I were to get the file finder dialog, by default I see it's going to open up in what appears to be the like one of the temp folders that GameMaker will like create when it runs your game through the IDE. But if I were to go to my user folder, and if I were to go to here be dragons.txt, I would then be able to open that file, even though it does not exist in either the included files bundle or the save area, and we can proceed as normal. If I were to do basically the same thing for writing to a file, we could say down here, how should we do this? So we can say file name equals, instead of get open file name, get save file name, which is going to take the same arguments as get open file name, but this is going to pertain to saving files. We can say var f equals file text open write file name, and this will now give us permission to save a file anywhere. So if I were to go run this and just dump it in my user folder, the message box, the open/save dialog, like Windows Explorer dialog, will be basically identical whether you use get open or get save file name, but it will they're not entirely the same function. They will deal with different like file permissions. So I can just say super secret message.txt, and we can do that. And now when I when I save a file created that way, if I go to my user folder, I can scroll down and I can see that we now have super secret message.txt, and it now saved correctly. So using get open file name will give GameMaker permission to read files from anywhere on your computer, and using get save file name will give GameMaker permission to write to any file on your computer, within reason. Now that's kind of nice, however, I don't believe as of the current moment, get save file name and get open file name I think only work on Windows, so if you're trying to make your game work on like Linux or HTML5 or something like that, I don't think, okay, Windows and Mac, not regular Linux. It just won't do anything, and I want to say it'll return an empty string on Linux and also on like mobile devices, HTML5, that kind of thing. So cross-platform users beware. It's not like you really need to open a save or load dialog very often when you're making a game, because usually it's preferred that you like make your game self-contained and don't jump out to Windows Explorer. This is something that you're more likely to use if you're writing like a dev tool or something, which some of us like to do. Now, the last thing that I'd like to show in this video is if you really like to live on the edge, you can actually disable the file system sandbox functionality altogether. So if I were to, let's comment out the asking permission before we do this. And let me go into game options. Let me go into, is it in main or in Windows? I guess it's in Windows. We can go down to the Windows options and check this little box that says disable file system sandbox. And there should be an equivalent one in, oh, is there not? Oh, there is. I was looking right at it. There's an equivalent one in the Ubuntu settings for Linux, and there's a Mac OS, I want to say, has an equivalent checkbox. So, like, for all two of you who are using GameMaker to make games for Mac. Now, if I were to uncheck that box, this is going to disable the file system sandbox behavior altogether. And if I were to run the game now, and we were to ask for the file inside the user folder, which GameMaker would not ordinarily have permission to access, we can now do it just fine, and the game won't crash. And the same applies for writing. If I were to, let's go back to commenting this out, and let us re-comment the section at the bottom here. I'm going to, let's go and delete this file so that we can see that it'll be recreated when I run this. So we're going to run this in the game's create event. We'll save the file. I saw it pop up on my other screen just now, super secret message.txt. It's back because when the file system sandbox is disabled, we can just like do this. So now that we've gone through all that, why do I actually think this is a good thing? After all, if this disable file system sandbox option was just like the default, this entire video would be basically irrelevant. So the original reason, or at least the most cited reason, I believe there are several reasons that this is a thing, but the most often cited reason that you hear for why the GameMaker file system behaves like this is because it keeps antivirus under control. So if you were to just read or write files to random locations on your computer, it's not a guarantee that that would set off your antivirus, or probably more importantly, your user's antivirus, but it does increase the chances that if you have an antivirus installed, it'll start to notice that you're doing things that might or might not look a little bit suspicious. And by keeping file access contained to either the file bundle or the save area or anywhere where you specifically got permission from the user with the file finder dialogues, the antivirus is much less likely to come knocking on your door and say, hey, what are you doing? And of course, the first time you've built your game and distributed it on the internet, if you haven't paid for like a code signing certificate, which is pretty expensive, like the first couple times you've run your game, you'll probably see the Windows user account control popping up and saying, hey, we've never seen this program before, are you sure to trust it? But that's pretty normal for any time you run unsigned code, whether or not it's a GameMaker game. Anyway, keeping your file reads, and especially writes, contained to where they belong just helps. The second reason why the GameMaker file system is like this, and this is actually probably the much more important one, especially for larger games, is that doing this ensures cross-platform compatibility. So if you're making a game on Windows or on Linux or whatever, those are pretty open platforms, and you can kind of do whatever you want within reason. But if you're making a game for like the PlayStation or the Nintendo Switch or something, disabling the file system sandbox is not an option. And you also, on console, obviously don't have access to the like get save, get open file name functions. On console, you have no choice but to keep your file rights contains to the save area, and the file reads contains to the save area and the file bundle. If you try to write to any random location on like the PlayStation 5's hard drive, the president of Sony would come break down your door, hit you with a stick, and take away your dev kit. And by enforcing the same limitations on all GameMaker games in general, and like abstracting away file access and just letting GameMaker handle it for you, this means that you as the game developer just don't have to think about all of this platform-specific stuff when it comes to porting your game to different platforms. The third reason which I say the GameMaker file system isn't actually as much of a problem as people think it is because when you're making an actual game, you really don't need to worry about anything outside of these two locations. If you just want to save the player's progress, you can just save a file with like the room ID and the player's coordinates and how much money they have and experience points and that stuff. You can save it to a file in local storage and move on with your day. When they come back to play again tomorrow, that file will still be there. And you really don't need to, and arguably shouldn't need to, worry about anything else outside of the save area. In all the actual games I've worked on over the years, I've never had to actually disable the file system sandbox because I don't need to. I don't need to access anything outside there. So there's one more extremely obscure option when it comes to the GameMaker file system sandbox, and this is specific to Windows, and you might have actually seen it when I popped up the Windows settings a minute ago. But by default, GameMaker will save your game files to the Appdata local folder. There are two other folders in the Appdata folder. There's local low, which is complicated. Most Unity games go there for whatever reason. And there's also the roaming Appdata folder, and GameMaker will let you choose whether you want to save to local Appdata, which is default, and the roaming folder, which is... the difference between these three files in Windows is pretty esoteric. I'll have a link to a more in-depth explanation in the description of the video. In pretty much all cases, the local Appdata folder should be fine, but the other one does exist. Alright, I'm gonna end this off here. My name is Michael. I like wizards and dragons and making games. I like to post videos on the weird stuff you can do in GameMaker. I certainly think this qualifies as weird, so if any of this interests you, feel free to subscribe. I have a Patreon, so if you want to contribute to the channel, links to that can be found in all the usual places. You should all go check out Wizarducks and the Lost Hat, which is this game that I like to work on when I'm not doing YouTube stuff. Link to the Steam page can be found down below. I hope you all found this useful, and I will see you all later. Special thanks to Zenjamin, VitroV, Squarecrow, Spy Die Games, Manta Ray, GameMaker, Edward Holt, and DJ Gibbles for supporting these videos. If you want to contribute to the channel, head on over to the Patreon page down in the video description to join the fun.